a video, anything. Okay.
All right. So all I was gonna say was about the concept of I saw a meme or something one day that basically said 10 things that don't require talent. And basically
Don't require what?
Talent.
Talent. Okay.
I think it's talent or skill.
Got it.
Yeah, 10 things that don't require talent or skill that make a good employee or something like that, you know? And something that really stuck out was, you might beat me, you might outdo me, but you will not outdo my effort, or you will not, you won't outwork me. You won't try harder than me, but you might still beat me. And to me, it doesn't matter if I win or not most of the time.
Yeah.
Like me and you have engineered a majority of life as win-win, I'd say.
Yeah. Oh, it's almost even it's like punching a baby now. It's too easy.
I in 2017 I started therapy because I didn't trust my own mind to tell me what was real anymore, because I had done too many impossible things.
Right.
And
nobody could understand how. So you had the opposite problem that I had. Is I had to learn how I could explain things at such a small level, and you had to learn how you could just feel what most people can't figure out at all. So there was
exactly.
a lack
Everybody's
of
telling
which
me
drove you inward. So you had to dive deeper, because the language of that connection is a deconstruction, and I have to pull higher because mine is a language of unification. So my most practiced language is your native tongue, and in reverse, your most practiced language, that is your second language, is my native tongue. So we can communicate from two different perspectives because we know enough about each other's perspective to make the translations possible at all.
I see those parallels and they work for me. I get that. What was the one more thing? Oh, also my dad told me a whole lot growing up, and I forgot it for about 15 to 20 years probably, but told me again in the last 5 about how the people who can't think like me will never be able to understand it.
Yeah.
And they will try to convince me that it's impossible. And that's okay. And he's been telling me this since I was my kid's ages, like because he started with himself, because he grew up, he actually went to the same high school I did, but his teachers in high school told him about things that were impossible, and he went home and literally did the science projects on them.
Yeah.
He like wrapped a wire around the phone line in the house and could tap into it without there being any disconnection or distortion in the signal. And like he did little projects like that his teachers told him were impossible.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna go take my bathroom break, but I will be back by 3.
Okay.
I would also like to mention, for the record, that with the addition of Thursdays, it reaches a new level of energy exchange for me.
Okay.
So the Tuesdays and the consistencies in the group chat, those are all upper normative levels. Me adding the Monday night, I didn't consider that any extra energy because that was just me. Mondays is me transmuting what you were giving me on Thursdays.
Okay.
I mean, actually, yeah, let's look at that for a second. So the Mondays being me transmuting what you're giving me on Thursdays. This Monday, I stated to the group more about the project.
What?
So what?
Transmuting from what to what?
Your energy to the energy you're giving me, transmuting that to the energy I'm giving you.
And then explain your concept of energy.
Energy is, we'll call it attention. Attention is the most basic way to put it for online and social purposes.
So
I have a quote.
Measured by duration and intensity as two different dimensions over time.
Well,
meaning if
right
you're paying
now,
half attention for twice
for the purpose of my statement and perspective of energy exchange, quality is not important, only quantity. And quantity is defined by time, because although it is a paradise, not a prison, it is still equal among everybody.
So here's what we're measuring differently.
And that's just a part. I had separated it for the context of my intent. Not that it wasn't true, just that it wasn't the author's intent. Okay.
Right. But to know the difference in all of that, to know the difference in energy and the different ways we have and have been measuring it, there is a dimension that I measure energy on, and that is attention span engagement, meaning I'm very aware of lapses in attention because that's my natural state. So if somebody stops paying attention who normally can pay attention until they get bored, you see that. So, but that's not to say that they're not invested in the conversation, because that would be a false dichotomy. That is to say there exists a spectrum to which they are engaged and they're doing something else at the same time. And with practice, you can measure that very accurately. So for anyone whose attention span is not like this, usually it's steady over time. And so that was one of the energies I was saying is you're trying to match the intensity of the attention span along with something else.
Okay, so like, for me,
if it's this intense and it's this long, you have a lot. But if it's this intense and it's this long, you have very little.
Well, see, for me, it's 100% about the value that you see in it. Remember.
Okay.
Oh, my camera just shut off. I might have to restart the computer. Can you still hear me though?
I can still hear you though.
Okay, then I'll at least finish this one thought, and then we'll actually get on topic.
Okay.
Maybe, but okay. So for me, the energy exchange. What's important to me between the energy exchange between Thursday and Monday? Because remember, we still haven't even had me talk about Thursday yet, but we can talk about that in the group chat. Anyway, so the energy exchange that's important for me is value. Remember, the very first one I said what was important to me was that you valued the time, or that I filled the hour with quality time. And at least about halfway through, I mentioned I'm not worried about that anymore. After that, we had more of the group chat. And remember, I melted and spiraled in a way that allowed me to map you better and stuff like that. And the quality is what's important to me most in the transmutation of giving you back that energy, because that's the only scale that I'll accept. That's the only measurement that I think can be valid to show me that I've correctly accomplished that goal, is how you value that.
It is measured over time. Like you can't just know in a second, you got to know and then you know.
Oh yeah.
Like you have.
Oh yeah. So right. So all I started with was that Thursday presents a new level of energy exchange now, because now we've got 3 out of the 7 days of the week. And for me, those 3 days mean that we are standing on the threshold of halfway.
Yeah.
And if we get and we're already, talking in the group chat every day and everything else.
Like more a part of our lives than we're not.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to make a professional and business and personal note between us in building this bomb. I feel like we've gathered the materials, and in adding Thursday, we're gonna start shaping them. We're gonna start unpacking those boxes, and we're gonna. It's almost like punching a baby.
We've got some parts. We can do some things. There's a few pieces that are missing, but I know what they are.
Exactly.
Yep.
Oh, that's the thing that also binds us too, is I know what I want to know. Or I know what I don't know, but I'm trying to know. You understand that somehow. All right, I'm gonna restart the computer. It should take less than a minute.
That's fine. I'm just gonna make fun of how you understand that somehow is the worst. It is like the most politician answer ever because it says nothing. I understand somehow. It could be completely wrong. But somehow I do understand it. I must.
But I trust the vibe that it's not wrong. And that's the key. That's the key.
Yep. Oh boy.
And I'm back.
Oh. Get next oatmeal pie on as soon as I finish eating. I'm gonna get going.
I am forwarding the link. Oh, good. I can tell you this then. Am I allowed to screen share? Did you activate screen sharing for everybody?
Thought I did. Keep a list of fallacies.
Well, I was gonna show you the only thing you ever need to send. Actually, no, I'll drop it in the you'll see it because I'm putting it in the bomb. Actually, you already sent it to the bomb. Well, I'll send it anyway again. That's the only link you ever need to send. The Zoom link that has password in it, when you send that, they don't need to put in a password. The link already has the login password in there. So you don't need to have it. And if you hit Alt-I when you have the invite screen for Zoom, or if you just put a copy invitation link, I think it is. Let me see. Yeah. So copy invite link does that link. Copy invitation gives you all that extra phone number stuff, I think.
Oh, I see. I just want the short one.
Yeah, you just need to copy the invitation link. You don't need the whole invitation.
Well, that's good. Thank you.
And I'm gonna double check it right now just to be certain.
So can you see my screen up there?
That is correct. Formal fallacies. Yes, I noticed it right away, and I took a logic class in college at some point. That was fun. No, I took it in high school. I took it in high school as a college elective, and I've used it ever since.
So I'm going to teach you, if you don't already know it, if you haven't already figured it out, what the dirty man's fighting handbook of logic looks like.
This is going to be
how to use dirty logic, which is wrong, but knowing your audience to know that two wrongs will make a right, that is an art. That is a real art. It's a beautiful thing to watch when it's done well. And it's an ugly thing to watch when it's screwed up.
Yeah, it's always screwed up.
That's sort of like, hey, what do you think about this vaccine? Oh no, they're doing the vaccine to cover up the aliens. And now they have to decide because it's good for Russia. And you pretty much, you turn all of their little paradoxes in on themselves. And then instead of it exploding, it's the equivalent of like the speed racer button on the steering wheel that like actually makes the go-go gadget springs jump out and lifts them off the track. So you essentially become like this sort of stunt driver slash Mr. Magoo correction mechanism for these illogical beings, where with enough of these crazy whack job adjustments, you can actually get them back on a stable track that has been mapped and is considered good. But you have to navigate that maze first before you can do anything at all. And that's where you have to learn, well, what bad logic is and how to get around it. So it's very, I guess we started the lecture. It's very it's very Taekwondo, it's very karate. It's very kata based, punch counter punch. So that means that, yes, these logical fallacies are a problem if you don't know they are there, okay? They are a problem because you won't understand that they're there and what happens if they are there, because you won't know how to check for it. Tony.
You said kata based. I was engaged to a 4th degree black belt, and one of my best friends is a black belt in at least 6 types of martial arts. So martial arts references work for me.
Yeah, I know Nancy likes them too. So yeah, it's very punch counter punch, like this paper beats rock, beats scissors, beats laser, beats Spock. You know, the more of these things that you know, and the faster you can make that instant connection to any which way because you know all the pieces inside and out, that's when you start to get the ability to understand that fallacies are necessities, because everything rests on assumption at some level. And we've covered the proof for that in a different lecture. So it is not about removing fallacy from one's perspective. It is about eliminating certain perspectives willingly to get a more clear view of other perspectives. And you recognize the boundary of that perspective. So as long as I am thinking about this right here, this is good. And I lose that when I think about this, that. So then you have to learn a different way to think about the world wrongly, so that you can see a very specific part of it very clearly. And you have to recognize where that makes the rest of the world invisible to you. And the more times you are able to do this, the more you can map what you cannot see, because at any given time, you can only see a very small part of it, which is your own unchanging perspective, or changing very slowly. It's far more quick to change your perspective by force than it is to wait for it to evolve over time. And by force to some is a different word for will to others. So to decide to change your perspective, because really it is a decision that you force yourself to do. If it's not a pleasant thing, you're forcing yourself to do it. Recognize that. That's a hint. It shouldn't be unpleasant. Force yourself to do things. So this is just an extension of that maturity. Is you can do a thing that's not natural because it's good for you. Different perspectives are eating your broccoli so that you can grow up to be, I don't know, a not narrow-minded idiot. So that's more or less what we mean by fallacy. So fallacies, just to give the one sentence summary so you're caught up, a fallacy is a necessity of perspective, because every perspective rests on assumption at some level. And there's a proof for that in a different lecture that I take 90 minutes to explain why that's not a bumper sticker slogan. There's math behind it, and it checks out if you look at it from this very narrow perspective, which if you argue that a very narrow perspective can't change, then trying to have a more broad perspective than that would mean you'd be arguing against me to disagree with me, which wouldn't make any sense at all. you're better off, I don't know, disagreeing with me at that point. Save us all the time. But today we're talking about fallacies. So in the classical context, a fallacy is a logically inconsistent argument, meaning it is not stable enough to stand on its own construction. It is a poorly constructed thing. If it was at the store, you wouldn't buy it. It would get thrown away because it's not correct, and it has no value other than an interesting piece of artistic nonsense, which preserves the value of all these fallacies, because figuring out how to understand how your own perspective limits the types of information you're able to understand or even be aware exist is a tough game to break into at all. So this is like the baby step version of that. Like the more you understand this, the more you will realize it's not the fallacies that are wrong. It's that we hang on to them that is wrong. We take them from moment to moment when that is not how perspective is supposed to work. Perspective is not the past. Perspective is not what happened last time, because our view of what actually led up to an event was partial and incomplete. And even if we had a very good view of everything that led up to what happened in the past, everything since then was something different and is leading to a different location that perhaps only looks like it did in the past. And the last answer is not necessarily the correct answer now, but it might be. So rather than just assume that it is, you check and say, what if it's not? Okay, is it still good? Has anything changed? What about this? What about that? No, okay, maybe now I have to change it because this was a factor last time and now it isn't this time. And if I did the same thing last time without changing my snapshot to the new information of really what would a person who is seeing this concept for the first time understand? That's the best perspective, is you've never met anything and this is the first time you've ever seen this at all. You don't know what a building is. You don't know what a rock is. You don't know what mortar is. You don't know what construction is. You assume you know nothing. And then watch how much information you are able to take in once you realize how much information is there to understand. That is what a fallacy is. A fallacy is saying that information isn't relevant to understand when you are using a mental processor that is a quantum computer that runs on 20 watts and it works at the speed of light. So there is no such thing as an irrelevant thought. It takes you longer to react to the disgust of having a thought that you'd rather not have and to create that chemical aversion than it would to map the entire infinity of every simulation you could imagine. So it has nothing to do with relevance at that point. That's all internal rationalization of avoidance. So that is what a fallacy is. A fallacy is when one of those avoidances becomes permanent. A fallacy is when one of those points of avoidance is not questioned, or it is ignored if something is important and is missing. So that's the definitions part of this. That's every lecture starts with definitions. So I talk about what I am talking about first, because in previous lectures, I made a very good case from my biased perspective that any stable piece of information needs to have length, width, dimension, and time for it to be a worthwhile idea, or at least a complete idea that has been measured from the minimum proper number of perspectives to give it solid form. It's a geometry thing. It's a way of constructing stable ideas using points and connecting them to build 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th, and so on, dimensional shapes, tesseracts, and so on. So you can build thoughts out of these stable points, which are definition, direction, time, which gives you length, width, height, angles, everything. There you have your shape. It exists. You can't say that your shape is true, but you can say that as long as you know the outside of your shape and you know where the boundaries are, that everything inside that shape is true. because it's been referenced to something that is not itself, that doesn't change. So that is kind of the short version of, yeah, I saw Tony, like, it made a lot more sense when it took me 90 minutes to explain it. That was a difficult thought to even get out, but yes.
Well, I was, you said something at the beginning. I don't remember if I raised my hand or not, but it was about definitions.
Yeah.
For me, for most online debate where people engaging, when people are online arguing and there's something wrong with their conversation, it's usually because they're talking about two different things. When someone wants to argue with me online, usually they don't know me. But if they don't know me and they want to argue with me, I usually start it from, or want to start it from, definitions, because that's usually what it comes down to. And that's where I think most miscommunication happens, because somebody says something and one word of it has a negative connotation for somebody else when it doesn't for the author. And then from that point forward, it's two completely separate tracks of information being shared, when neither one is really in disagreement with the other. Like, I've seen people
our control
hundreds of words and they were in agreement, but they was just not getting the message. So him starting with the definitions every time, even if the definition is 1/3 of the lecture, is really, for me, building the foundation, which is, what this is. This is the first time through the series. This is the first time we're ever trying something like this, but the goal is to refine it and improve it. And so definitions are like,
well, the thing about this type of information too is it's exponential. So I can say that because I've experienced it, and I'm telling you it's exponential. But Tony is starting to experience that because he told me what I needed to know was things are starting to get more interesting. So that is episode 13, 1/3 of the way through a graph of a roughly 30 part series. So if you look at a graph that is exponential, it is flat for at least the first third, and then it starts to tick up slightly, which Tony noticed. And now I started to see it's getting interesting. So the reason it takes so long to get from here to there, that 1/3, is because that it is literally the foundation. So those points will be used in some very fun ways that you can believe are true because you took the time to measure all of this in these very specific ways, which you've seen how stable they are. So the goal is not, so that's a good thing. A goal for building is not function, it is stability. So if something is stable, it is relevant. That's one of the ways I understand information on the most fundamental level.
Is not function, it's stability.
So yes, stability of a thing is more reliable than what that thing might be able to do, or what it should or shouldn't. Because you can build things with reliable. That's my favorite. All right, so now I'm going to switch gears a little bit because this entire lecture is going to be much better suited to my thought process than the lectures I've been giving before. So this is a shotgun data point exercise, which means the goal is to give you vocabulary. The goal is not to absorb. The goal is to make you aware of things you didn't know, or things you haven't thought about. So what that means is I have a lot of information to cover in a very short amount of time, and I have some pretty good plans for the future editing of this specific part of the lecture that might involve some auto tune and would require a little bit of a more intense and fast delivery. So this is going to be like the lightning round for me, and I'm going to get through as many of these as I can. I'm going to read some of them, and then I'm going to just do my Tom thing, where I get to one, I think of a quick example, and then you're on your own. I'm moving on. So this is Tom at full speed. So that's a thing that I normally don't get to do because I'm worried about losing people. But here, I'm going to have a hard time keeping up. So the rest of you are on your own. So I'm going to make this bigger so I can read it better. And you can too. We covered fallacies. We covered the format of the lecture. So on to the lightning round. Formal fallacies. Formal fallacy is an error in the argument's form. All formal fallacies are type of non sequiturs, meaning what Tony just said, branching off to an irrelevant, non-connected plot. So a formal fallacy, these are like some definitions. Appeal to probability, a statement that takes something for granted because it probably would be the case, which means you're acting like something is true when it's only sometimes true, and that's not good for you. Argument from fallacy, also known as fallacy, is the assumption that if a particular argument for a conclusion is fallacious, then by conclusion, it is by itself false. So what does that mean? It means that you are saying, if you're arguing something false, then your conclusion is false. That doesn't mean your conclusion is false, because a wrong clock is right twice a day, and it's wrong a bunch of times if it's flashing on and off for the hour of noon. So that's why that doesn't work. Base rate fallacy, making a probability judgment based on conditional probabilities. So more or less, you're saying that you're taking into account the effect of prior probabilities. You're using old data, using old trends, saying that the past will repeat the future in a cycle that never ends. That's not how it works. You got to keep going. You update your information so that you can stay relevant to the situation. Conjunction fallacy is the assumption that an outcome simultaneously satisfying multiple conditions is more probable than an outcome satisfying any single one of them. So what does that mean? That's a mouthful to say. The assumption that an outcome simultaneously satisfying multiple conditions is more probable than it's satisfying any one of them. That's saying, I know the one reason why one thing works for everything. You've got a magic rock and you point it at anything you want and you say, well, a wizard did it. That's what that means. Conjunction fallacy. Oh, God will provide, but maybe he's not going to give you a lotto ticket. Maybe he provided you with a wanted ad and a family that loves you and tells you to be more responsible. Or maybe he provides you with, I don't know, a family that loves you. Or maybe he provides you with an opportunity that you maybe shouldn't have had. That's what that might mean. But if you're saying, oh, it's just going to turn out good, I got no culpability here, that's the conjunction fallacy. Non sequitur, that means that your conclusion has nothing to do with your premise. So if I was using an example for that, I would talk about alphabets. Masked man fallacy, illicit substitution of identicals. The substitution of identical designators is in a true statement can lead to a false one. So that one's tough for me, actually. Substitution of identical designators in a true statement. Oh, you're changing, actually, okay, you want to take a stab at that one, Tony? I'm having trouble. The masked man fallacy. The substitution of identical designators in a true statement can lead to a false one.
That seems like seems like similar to straw man to me. Like
okay, yeah. You
being like something that
the question to fit the answer. Maybe.
That's what it seems like from my perspective. I mean, click on the link, see what comes up next real quick.
We've got lightning round, so I guess I'm on my own for that one.
We've got 10 seconds to spare. Come on.
No, I don't know it. That's enough for me. Propositional fallacy. So I mean, I'm going to tune down the rap there. We already know I was amazing. I don't have the stamina to go 90 minutes. Not if my wife wants me to have the stamina to go 90 minutes. I can't do both. Oh, yeah. All right. Propositional fallacies. I'm just going to skip to the math. A or B. A, therefore not B. That's either or. You know, it's got to be one or the other, on or off. There's no shades of gray, no direction except one yes or no. So assuming that is true is bad. That's what they're saying. Affirming the consequent. So that's if A, then B, which is to say that if B, that means A. No, not necessarily. B might come from 10 different things. A makes B every time. B can also come from anything else that you might not be including by assuming it's only A. The denying the antecedent. If A, then B. Not A, therefore not B. Same thing as above. You're assuming there's only one path to B. And you're basing it off of assumptions made about A, which means you're not really understanding B because you're too focused on A. Okay, quantification fallacies. This one you'll see more often than anything else. The existential fallacy, an argument that has a universal premise and a particular conclusion. People love to bust that one out. That's just the way it is. That's how I always believed it. Nothing, no, you're never going to change my mind. That's just how the universe works. And whatever. That's the existential fallacy. Formal syllogistic fallacy. So I'm actually going to look at the word syllogism because it's in every one of these. So a syllogism is a kind of logical argument that applies deductive reasoning to arrive at a conclusion based on two propositions that are asserted or assumed to be true. So a syllogism is like a house of cards. You're saying, if I have an ace of spades and I have an ace of diamonds and I lean them against each other, that's the argument, I can make a little triangle. That's a syllogism, if you were to make a little shape out of it. And then these little things here tell you how to make sure the cards are balanced, right? So if you're missing some of this or you're doing some of this, one of your cards is bigger than the other, which means it's going to topple a certain way, which is useful for changing the direction of conversations once you understand how to make the card any length you want. But first you have to recognize how your card is not the length you think it is. Make the appropriate adjustment, and then the latter becomes possible. And that's going to take some work because you're blind to it, and that's the way these things work. All of them. These are all things people are blind to. So it's worse if you say none of them apply to you. That makes you more blind. That's an existential fallacy right there, and that's how you use that, Tony. You just make a blanket claim and put your will behind it.
But from my perspective, that would be a misunderstanding of the information.
Yeah, well, to me, the goal is just to put it out there with some ego behind it and say, I dare you to say I'm wrong because I'll beat you on ego alone. So if you can survive the ego, then you're ready to have the conversation. That's the claim.
That's why our disconnect happens so often, because in my spiritual groups, they're all striving for ego death as a core egregore collective of the group. And most spiritual groups, they say ego is part of the shadow and bad and other things like that. Now, Heyoka's different because we utilize ego differently.
Yeah, A or B, yeah. A therefore not B.
From our perspectives, we see both, but you're used to people being ego unconscious, while I'm used to the people being ego negative.
I call them ego frail. Mostly because they're powerful, but they're frail.
I can use that.
There you go. Good for you. That sounded so much more condescending than it was. Just know that I meant it. That's all I can do. Moving on. The syllogistic fallacies, the I have two things and it means this thing fallacy. So affirmation, conclusion from a negative premises, an illicit negative. That means that you have a positive conclusion, but one negative premise. So you're saying as long as this doesn't happen, it means this. That doesn't mean anything except that didn't happen. Yeah, no, done. Like there's so many other things that are not related to that not happening. Like I didn't die today. Okay, there's a lot of things that are related to that not happening. Okay, my wife is doing fine. I'm here. I'm teaching people. I'm moving around. I'm having a good time. So none of that would be possible if I died. But that doesn't mean that nothing that has been present while I've been alive suddenly goes away because now I'm gone. The trains will still run on time. The airports aren't going to shut down or disappear. We're not going to lose electricity or buttered bread. It's going to happen. So it's putting so much weight on a thing that doesn't happen. It's the same thing as saying, I don't really understand what it means if this thing happens. You're showing your level of understanding by saying, I can't understand more than this never happens. And an unwillingness to go beyond that is what causes this particular conclusion of a negative premise. You hear that all the time in theistic and atheistic debates, and they take turns using them. So it's all fallacies all over the place. It's a real crucifest. The fallacy of exclusive premises. Categorical syllogism that is invalid because both of its premises are negative. That's even worse. If this doesn't happen and that doesn't happen, I'll be fine. You don't know that. That's what you're worried about happening. You have two worries. Now, if you were a sufficiently worried person with a good intelligence, you might be able to come up with a list of several thousand things that eliminate all of the different bad things that could happen to you at a given time. But even then, you haven't proved that you'll be fine. You've just proven that you've done a lot of thinking about the ways you couldn't be fine and have mapped yourself out as much as you can understand. Hopefully, it outpaces the things that are trying to get you, whatever those might be. The fallacy of four terms. Well, that's just saying it takes four things to happen. That's not how math happens. Math always goes, you can always reduce it down to one. You know, you need to be able to reduce it down to 2 points to make a line. The syllogism is trying to make a line. If you have 4 points, you can't say which line they're making or what's making what line. It's nonsense. Try to draw it if you don't believe me. A categorical syllogism is invalid because its major term is not distributed to its major presence, but is distributed to the conclusion. So that's saying, I'm angry at this person. I'll never accept their apology. But so it's a clumsy example. Let me try again. Major term. So it's a thing that doesn't measure itself by its own standard. That's a good way of saying it. So it's a behavior that is frowned upon, but is committed during the frowning act. Like it's okay to have that behavior so long as the motivation is behind it is correct. And so it is more a judgment of motivation than it is of behavior. And the behavior is just being blamed for everything that's happening. It's removing the element of free will from the human at all. It's a scapegoat type thing, a mental scapegoat system. The illicit. So the next one is the same thing. It's you have a minor thing that's part of your premise, but you don't test that against itself. It's the little thing that kind of makes it work. And then you add this little tiny piece, and well, you could come up with all sorts of very relevant facts about that little tiny piece, and you would say, well, this little tiny piece would behave like this, and you say, no, that little tiny piece only behaves like that. So you ignore the variability of a small part of your argument, but assume a good outcome for that variability in a very specific way in your conclusion. So you carry along the bad logic with it. It sneaks around, it's got a fake ID. The negative conclusion for affirmative premises is, man, these things have silly names. Don't worry about the names. Worry about what's happening. In fact, I'm going to forget the names. I'm just going to worry about what's happening. You can match them up to the fancy terms on your own. A categorical syllogism has a negative conclusion but affirmative premises. So that's saying if this happens and this happened, this won't happen. You won't do it unless the things you did trying to make it not happen actually make it happen, which happens all the time. If you've read Nietzsche and understand the nature of axioms, which I summarized in a previous lecture, that's exactly what happens. So don't do that. The fallacy of undistributed middle. Okay, that's the middle term in a syllogism is not distributed. Meaning there's no equation. It's not, and that's A and B. It's just saying no, A, B. Like, okay, well, there's the two things that exist. What do they do? A, B. It's like 9/11 was bad, and it was bad. Okay, what do we do? Well, that was just really bad. I don't know. But it doesn't go anywhere. It's just, it's just there. So that's the undistributed middle. There's no connection. The modal fallacy, confusing necessity with sufficiency. That's a big, complicated example there. Here, I'm just going to read the last one. For example, riding a bus is a sufficient mode of transportation to go to work, but there are other modes of transportation, car, bicycle, taxi, or walking that can be used. Oh, I see. It's preferred methods over total number of valid methods. It's a bias. It's where you don't consider alternate paths. There you go. Why didn't I just say that? The modal scope fallacy. A degree of unwarranted necessity is placed on the conclusion. Oh, it's for our kids. Oh, think of the children. Oh, this country's tearing itself to hell. Oh boy, we really got to get this one right. We're never going to see another election this important in the rest of our lives. We're fighting for our lives out here. There you go. Every news station. Where do I get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that live? I would. Why not? Okay, so now we're at the informal fallacies. They're logically unsound for lack of well-grounded premises. So this is commonly misunderstood and believed things. Argument to moderation, assuming that a compromise is always the answer. It's not. It's not. Like, I can think of the worst example. I'm gonna flip a coin to come up with my example here. If it lands on the cross, I'm going to come up with a kind example of this. If it lands on the shield, I'm going to come up with a mean example of this, because both of them are important to understand. I'm only got time for one. The shield. All right, we're getting dark. So normally, forgive me for this, because I made a promise and I'll stick to it. Normally, a gang rape is 90% plus in favor of a thing, and a very small percentage of against that thing. So why don't we just meet in the middle and say only half of them have to be into it? I really wish I could have done something with candy or puppies, but that's the potential destructive power of a fallacy. So you need to understand how deep these run and what their destructive potential is, and how some of them explode if they're set off in ways that are not carefully thought out. The Matrix movie had a really good analogy for this toward the end. So if you haven't seen the new Matrix movie, there's a spoiler. Sorry. The guys, they jump. Toward the end of the movie, they're trying to make an escape, and they've got this like hijack mechanism where they can override the people and turn them into suicide bombers, where they literally give up their life, open the window, and throw themselves out. And that is because the state of their psyche, which has been maintained by a constant diet of sugar and dreadful or anger-induced media, puts them in a specific frequency that can be interacted with in a different specific way, which will reliably produce a predictable result. They can turn these people into suicide bombers because they lack the self-awareness, metaphorical suicide bombers, which means they will do the thing without question to their own safety. They will do the thing without question to their own personal growth or their personal well-being or their advantage. They will, it's thank you, sir, may I have another. That is the state of mind that is maintained. And so, and that's one of the reasons I don't mind the dark examples, because I am a creature who has made it my job to explore the light and the dark and to understand how you go from one to the other. Because if you can imagine one, you can usually find the other if you have the strength to look what's there. So when I had to do that very horrific and graphic example, I put everybody in a place that was very horrific and graphic. And now I needed to show them, everyone, it's possible to take that information, to take that and put a seriousness behind it that can change your perspective, which can give you an advantage that you didn't have before, which is the ability to protect yourself a little bit when somebody tells you this is why a thing is true. Every reason a person says why a thing is true is on this list. And you need to find out the difference between true and relevant damn quick. because the people that know the difference are the ones running the show. And if you're complaining about them, you're not them. In fact, they know you're doing that because that's part of the show. If you didn't complain about them, then what? What would you do instead if you didn't have something to complain about? What would you do at that time? Everybody. That's the question I have. But we're not going to find that out anytime soon because the media doesn't want that. They need the little buttons that make the people do the things when they're emotionally unstable. So there you go. So on to more of these things and how to protect yourself against them. The continuum fallacy, the fallacy of the beard. What is this? The bald man fallacy. This thing has so many acronyms, AKA. It's got a rap sheet as long as my arm. Improperly rejecting a claim for being imprecise. So that's saying you didn't measure close enough. I do that one a lot. The continuum fallacy, meaning I don't trust your measurement. I won't do it again. But to be fair, whenever I do that, I do take a measurement. I don't just say it's wrong. Like I said, let's take a measurement. So it's more of a continuum questioning, I guess. But I always assume that there could be a better measurement made if both of us compared notes. But maybe that's pulling outside information. Either way, the definist fallacy. Defining a term used in an argument in a biased manner. Here's a funny joke, because I got to balance that other one out still. When was the last time you were caught masturbating in the closet? Yeah, that's a loaded question, isn't it? You could say never. And then I could say that's because it's a good hiding place. But because it's a loaded question. So that's the definist fallacy. You phrase the question in such a way that the answer doesn't matter. The divine fallacy. It's unbelievable. I can't believe it. I'm not going to believe it. It's just a statement of there's nothing. It's too much for me to believe. All it is a statement of transcendent concept. No, can't do it. No, ain't gonna do it. That's the divine fallacy. Double counting. Counting events or occurrences more than once in probabilistic reasoning. Oh boy, yeah. So you have, which leads to the sum of probabilities of all cases. So pretty much you're weighting events inappropriately. Certain things matter too much. To the degree that other things that should matter don't matter at all. Equivocation, using a term with more than one meaning in a statement without specifying which meaning is intended. So there's a lot of ways to do that. And this is where you can actually have some fun. Equivocation is the equivalent of mental aikido. I'm going to say that again. Equivocation is the mental equivalent of aikido. Aikido is a martial arts style that relies on redirecting energy without being harmed by it. And ideally, without harming the one who gave it. It is a nonviolent pacifist style. So when somebody argues against you with false duality, either or, you counter with equivocation, where you give them their or and say, here's why their or could be either or. It's the equivalent of a take, yes, a spin, and then a kickback. They don't understand how you spin it and give it back to them, but they do know if they challenge it, then they take back their part of you agreeing with part of what they said, which is a validation response, which, if you've been paying attention to the previous lectures, is a symptom that is most closely tied to false duality. So if you don't understand the concept of duality, you are likely vulnerable to validation-based counters, where you are ambiguous but validating. That is the counter. So there is a very useful piece of this. So yeah, all Democrats are gun-toting or gun-hating whatevers. And then you could say, yeah, I've met some Democrats that are like that. But how do you tell the difference from the bad ones and the really bad ones? So now they've got to make a separation where they didn't think a separation existed before because they were just saying it was either or. So you split the difference, right? And then you use that false compromise thing because you're giving them expertise in a thing that you know is unbalanced. So you help them develop their unbalanced idea to the point where they agree it's unwieldy. That is the power of equivocation. Because it's a half validation, so they'll always feel the need to add more, even though you're not challenging them directly. They give it to you, you spin it, give it back. They add something to it, they give it, you spin it, give it back, they add, and so on. And eventually, either they realize the parts of this that are unnecessary and can consolidate the idea, in which case they're like, oh, I guess I only needed this much. Thank you. I guess it's this and this. And then you say, yeah, now you got it. Good job. Or if they get frustrated, they'll blame you. Why isn't this working? Why don't I feel better? Usually when I talk this long, people agree with me, but I don't feel like you're saying anything at all. What are you trying to hide from me? What sort of secrets are you? You don't like me. Are you judging me? And it gets very paranoid, because what it is the awareness that you're being observed in a way that makes you look foolish, but you are also aware that you're the only one doing things right now. So there's a lack of ability to separate that. And so anyone who's got a blindness to personal vulnerability or weakness will regurgitate that concept into one of outside aggression they need to respond to because there's an obvious and directed threat. So that's how you can make that useful. Moving on. Ecological fallacy, inferring about the nature of an entity based solely on aggregate statistics collected by a group. So that's saying any statement that begins with all blank people, fill in the blank. I don't care what you use, all blank people, and you're using statistics, you're doing the ecological fallacy. Next one, I can't pronounce that, etymological fallacy. Assuming the original or historical meaning of a word or phrase is necessarily similar to its present day usage. So I have a funny example of that. You can't throw a faggot on the fire anymore. Most people don't know that that's Old English for a bundle of sticks, and it was around long before you were ever born, and got sensitive about that word. People were throwing faggots on the fire to stay warm. It was accepted. You could go next door and borrow. Hey, you got a spare faggot? You could lend me. I'm very cold this winter. That was acceptable. But to assume that the rest of the world has done this and has kept this line of thinking through untold generations, and to act like this snapshot of a very acceptable thing is transferable to a present day usage is silly. It's silly in the ways that would have people showing up on your lawn with signs and things that aren't kind, because you shouldn't do that, because you should be more aware of at least what's going on. So, and then from there you can get stuck in reverse. So then you can say, well, no, we need to go back and strike that phrase from the record because we can't even have people learning of it. Well, then that's no good, because then you're rewriting things that actually happened. Sometimes that's all you've got. Are you going to guess? How specific is the thing that you're getting rid of? Could you guess that again if you needed it? That's why changing history is not a good idea. It's too specific. You couldn't imagine it. You have to know something about it, at least know where to look. You don't ever get the full picture, but if you know where to look and you know a little bit about how information works, you can kind of guess. You can also guess by looking at people who have a lot of money, because they're always a few years ahead of where we should be. So do what they do, which is what I do. Seems to be working for me. The little amounts that I can put towards it, it's never a bad bet. The fallacy of composition, assuming that something is true in part, so it must be true in whole. That's a different version of the other one. It's, yeah, this is true, so that is very closely related to this thing is also true. You don't know that. You have to link them up first. The fallacy of division, assuming something true of a composite thing must also be true for some of all of its parts. This is one I run into all the time. Hey, Tom, I got this question for you. Okay, what kind of blank did you mean? What do you mean, what kind? There's only one kind of blank. No, you have this kind, and you have this kind, and you have this kind. Well, none of those are kinds. I was like, that's why I'm asking you, which kind are you talking about? No, the only kind. Okay, but this is that fallacy. Is it doesn't go smaller, Tom. That's what they say. And I say it's not about going smaller, it's about having a different perspective. You only think that's smaller because compared to what you know, you would feel smaller. And you would, because you'd be learning something. That's the only time you feel smaller is when you suddenly become more. How else would you know? Anyways, the fallacy, the false attribution. Oh yeah, Rick and Morty did a fun one on this where they had the talking heads, and then everybody believed that the talking heads were like God, and they started worshiping it when really the talking heads were running a game show, and the people were just misinterpreting what the talking heads were saying as the actual spoken sky, like head from the sky God. They assumed it was for them. And so that was the false attribution. They missed. No, didn't happen that way. False authority. There we go. Yeah, just making up experts. That's a good one. Somebody else said it. False dilemma, false dichotomy, fallacy of bifurcation. Two alternative statements are given as the only possible options when in reality there's more, and that's where you get yelled at when you say there's more. They say it's either or, which is saying be my friend or don't, is what their translation is. Can I trust you or can't I? Because this is as much as I can understand the breakdown of these concepts. And you're with me or you're against me, but that's in reality, there are more. Limitation of imagination is far more likely than a limitation of relevance. You can quote me on that. I can quote me on that. If I can remember to, I'll quote me on that. The false equivalence. Describing two or more statements as virtually equal when they're not. That's like saying a pound of bananas is worth 20 pounds of gold. No, it's easily proven false by measuring. Historian's fallacy, assuming that decision makers of the past had the same information we do. Oh, the Bible's not scientific. It wasn't written by scientists. I'm sure if the Bible was written with a bunch of lab coat and calculator guys, you'd find detailed log books of all the times they prayed and which directions they faced when they got rain for their crops. But that wasn't the culture of the time. The scientific method didn't exist until Isaac Newton and all them other guys got together and said, hey, why don't we start figuring out how to weed all the bullshit out? And then now you have NASA. Let's see, skip that one there. That's a tough one for me to do. I'm just gonna skip that one. We're gonna do If by Whiskey. An argument that supports both sides of an issue by using terms that are emotionally sensitive or ambiguous. Look, it doesn't matter if we agree or disagree. What's really important is that the children get what they want. That's the emotional disarmament of both positions. Politicians are great at that. Anybody who's a good talker is great at that. If you want to de-escalate a situation, if you want to fight dirty with somebody who doesn't understand the difference between many and either or, if by whiskey is a good technique to get them to chill the fuck out. You find common ground that appeals to emotion and change the damn subject. Because anywhere is better than where their head is currently. Let's see here. Incomplete comparison. That's like comparing something to inconsistent comparison. That's where the same way of doing, maybe I should do this one differently. Maybe I compare it in a completely different way than before. I'd have to tell a joke or something. That's an example of an inconsistent comparison, which I've ruined by making it consistent with the rest of the lecture now. So you can either have the irony or don't. If you want the irony, you have to go to the point in the lecture where I have it and then skip 5 seconds forward. That's the only way to avoid it at all. Intentionality fallacy. The insistence that the ultimate meaning of an expression must be consistent with the intention of the person whom communicated. So that's basically saying Hitler never had any good ideas. Well, how do you get elected? he cleaned up the factories. He wiped out disease among the working class. He eliminated unemployment. And then he got weird. But to say that anything that he didn't do before that wasn't an act of objective good to the people who were experiencing it, with relatively little harm to those around them, because it was inside the country and everybody agreed to follow the rules, it didn't become a problem until it left the borders of Germany. Now, you could say that there were other problems that were building within social tensions and such, but those weren't his fault any more than any other person who was a part of that time. He existed with whatever that was. It wasn't him. So all of that is to say, yeah, he was a really bad guy, and it's good that he killed himself at the end of the war, and wish we could have done it sooner so we could have saved all them lives. But maybe he knew a thing about making factories better. So you don't throw out the Hitler manifesto of how to make factories better when you might actually save some lives by taking the good information from there and putting the rest in the fire where it belongs. That's that fallacy. That's the, if I don't trust you, you're lying fallacy, which is a good thing to use if somebody is suspicious. Somebody is suspicious of you, that's a language they understand. You know, you might be right, but how can I be sure? That's a very subtle way to get somebody who's being aggressive to chill the fuck out and try, because they're used to getting spit on. But now this specific fallacy is the counter to that. I just can't trust you because, you know, I don't, but I want to. Done. That's the move. And nobody who understands that they're doing that by accident is ever ready for it, and it works every time. When it's fun is when you meet somebody who knows some of these and you get to use them on each other in the ways that you know they work. And both of you understand what's happening, and you both can feel it when one of you screws up. Those are fun. If you take this language to its end, there are other people who practice it. They do it for fun. I'm one of them. They learn these arguments, and they don't have to know that the contest, both people don't have to know the contest is over for the contest to be over when this is the game. The game is, if I do this, do you know the counter to that? Do you know where my perspective is weak? And then they would say, yes, but you do this. And now what do you do this? And then, do you know the counter to your own perspective well enough to know the counter to that, which offsets your weakness? And then that can go back and forth, and there's different directions and different paths. And it almost becomes a game of like the little boxes that you used to draw on notebook paper. And you each take a turn. And when you run out of room and you count up all the boxes with your name inside, you see who had the most squares, and that was the person who won. That is how that game is played with these different fallacies. So let's see, the kettle logic, using multiple jointedly inconsistent arguments to defend a position. That's where if your one answer is right, well, I've got another one. I've got the dead brother solution. It's like a role-playing thing. My character died, so what do? Well, I'm playing his twin brother who's going to avenge him, and I get all his stuff because I was related to me, and I look just like him, and I have all of his childhood memories, and I read his diaries, so I know everything that the party was up to for the weeks leading up to my death, so I'm just going to kind of slide it. So it becomes a do-over. It's like, look, this is my character now, and it just becomes endless, and it's as comical as it is endless, because it's literally like these disposable cannon fodder that don't matter so long as there's another one. That is that fallacy. The lucid fallacy, failing to take into account that non-regulated random occurrences, unknown unknowns, can affect the probability of an event taking place. Oh, I got a hot tip on Bitcoin. I shouldn't use that because I was right. I had one person who had money, who believed me, who made 6 figures on my advice, and I'm not going to tell you who it was. And I was very proud of that person for having faith in me. And I was even prouder of myself for reading the situation perfectly right. There's a Facebook post on there when I said buy it and stop. That's a matter of public record. That was a good one. And that was all psychology derived, by the way. That had nothing to do with market understanding, nothing about Bitcoin. It was all psychology. And my Tom algorithms predicted that on a national scale, when to buy Bitcoin. I was right to the day. Very proud of that. But that's me tooting my own horn, because I should do that more, because I am amazing in certain ways. And I often don't shine the light on that when I could. I feel it keeps me small. It's time for me to grow. All right, the lump of labor fallacy, the misconception that there are a fixed amount of work to be done within an economy, which can be distributed to create more or fewer jobs. So that is, the pie doesn't grow. That's that fallacy. If somebody, then not somebody else. That's that fallacy. Well, no, we have economy of scale. We have production quotas. We have changeover efficiencies, where maybe the difference in doubling a capacity is really about 7 extra work hours in a day, because they keep the machines on longer and get the supplies out, that sort of thing. It assumes an inability of adjustment to be possible in any direction. That's that one. Yeah, the pie is whatever you can make it. People are bakers. If you can bake, you can have a pie. That's the economy. There you go. If you can bake, you get a pie. That's the economy. Think of it as a metaphor. The economy is like a thing with a mix of ingredients that, when put together correctly, give a sweet outcome. And the person is the chef with access to some or all of those different fixed ingredients. And it is up to the limits of their creativity to use the ingredients they have access to create a dish that is worthy of consumption, and then is able to produce a net effect in that economy, which is, I made something that tastes good with what I had to work with the things I had to get it done. So that's the analogy there for how the economy really works at its core. Some people are terrible bakers. And what's the worst thing you can do to someone who's sensitive about their cooking? Is tell them they're a terrible cook. And then they'll keep making terrible meal after terrible meal and blaming everyone else for a lack of poor quality ingredients and bad measuring instructions. It doesn't matter how much sugar you put in. Eventually, you're just going to get diabetes. Stop trying to make everything so sweet all the time. Learn to balance it out a little bit. Put some damn vinegar on something. I don't know. Wake up. Water. Start with water. You can't fuck that up. Be like water. How many people have said that? Bruce Lee said that. Be like water. Anyways, I got lost in my own silliness there. That happens sometimes. I'll try to keep it to a minimum. The McNamara fallacy, making an argument using only quantitative observations and discounting subjective information that focuses on quality. So that is quantity over quality. There was 500 bolts that came through my factory this year. Okay. That's a lot different than saying there was 300 bolts that came through my factory this year and they were solid gold. That is a false equivalence of relevance. Next one, mind projection fallacy, assuming that a statement about an object describes an inherent property of the object rather than a personal perspective. I've got the full view. Here's how it really is. That's the mind projection fallacy. The I have it right and everyone needs to agree with me fallacy. It's a big one. A lot of people project their minds, which is useful. Mind projection fallacy. That is a statement of perspective that is unintentionally honest. I'm going to take a drink while you think about that. Here's how it really is. You need to vote for blank. I think guns are bad because of. That's a lot of ego behind that statement. And most people are creatures of validation. Think about that. Which means anything with ego behind it also has subjective certainty behind it. And if you go back to the beginning of the lecture, it is not about what is true, it is about what doesn't change. And as long as that person's views on what is and isn't subjective do not change, then what they view from their A subjective perspective also does not change, which means you can learn it. Over time, you can learn it. You can use it. You turn it on and off. You can counter it, but it can counter different parts of you. Learn how it's right, even though it's wrong. That's the depth of the mind projection fallacy. It is not a subtle or thing without depth. It is infinite potential to understand what a person is saying by the words they won't use, by the ideas they don't understand, by the metaphors they subconsciously avoid. It's a language subtlety. It's a language of reaction. It is action to reaction. That is the language, which from a subjective point of view is a different perspective of reaction, which goes to Tony and I, our difference in perspective. We have a difference of reaction on a fundamental level. We go in opposite directions by default. But learning how to map that means using a different lecture that I gave. You can use wave addition from quantum superposition and the Schrodinger equations to understand how your brainwave imprint interacts with another brainwave imprint and adds together to produce peaks and valleys with new extremes that were not previously possible for you on your own. And if you are sufficiently grounded within your current mental state, then you know how to get there and go back to any place you've been once. So by seeking out specific perspectives of mind projection, you can understand the shapes of yourself that you don't know. You can make a map of what you don't know by understanding the mind projection fallacy. It is a gateway fallacy. Every person has one, and it's different. So learning how they're the same is learning how to make them work together. Learning how they're different is how to make them do together what only one of them can do on their own, but with the force of an entire army behind it instead of one. That is what it means to master the mind projection fallacy. Because then what happens? You learn enough of these, and you meet someone who's looking for one you already know. If you understand what their ask is, you can give them the answer you know. And sometimes, if you were paying attention to how the person taught it to you, if you can reproduce that energy because you feel a harmony with that energy, a sympathetic vibration with that energy where you want what was good for you to be good for something that is like you as well, that is how that idea can propagate. So you can create, not only can you create a stable projection from other people's perspectives by putting it together, you can learn how to reproduce parts of it in others by recognizing the shape of what they need and don't have and giving it to them for free. That is the potential of the mind projection fallacy. Moving on. The moralistic fallacy, inferring factual conclusions from evaluative premises in violation of fact value distinction. Inferring is from ought. Moralistic fallacy is the inverse of the naturalistic fallacy, blah, blah, blah. Here's what that means. The can't get an ought from an is. This is what happens. That means, well, that's why. That's why. That is the mistake. That's the fallacy. Because of this, that means. It's hard to say. But that is, you can't get an is from an ought. You can only get an is. You only know is. You don't know ought. You guess about ought. You have an incomplete mental projection of complete information that you have access to at the time, which is a small percentage compared to the actual information there is to be had in the universe compared to how much we think we don't know. That much is how much we know about the ought. But we can know is down to as small as we can think, right? So there's an advantage to being able to think smaller, more precision about where you are precisely, that is not somewhere else. And then the ability to change that over time is what people will struggle with. Some will struggle to think bigger, like me. I had to do a lot of mapping, and I had to learn the math of thinking bigger because I can't understand thinking bigger. I have to do a process that I don't intuitively understand, but I operate on faith and mathematical construction based on these things from these lectures that helps me think bigger. And there are parts of it I can explain and parts of it that I just throw my hands up and say, well, I turn the crank and a banana comes out, so 3 bananas. I'm not gonna question it. Like when the bananas stop, I'll question it. I have everything I need right now. I'm gonna keep going. Moving the goalposts. Yeah, this one. Man, if we could just fix this, that'd be great. Hey, we fixed it. Well, if we could only just get that other thing, because now it's not great, right? We still got a lot of work to do. So this is still a very important thing. And then, hey, we did all that stuff we were gonna do. Only you had said that 1 minute after I asked you last time, I could have felt some satisfaction that we were done. But it's the goal never ends, and the closer you get doesn't matter because it's not a goal. They just have a pole that you're attached to, and however far you go, you move as far away from that as well. So it's not a moving goalpost. It's a relative goalpost. That is a better way to think of this fallacy. It's not a moving goalpost. The goalpost doesn't move. The goalpost looks like it's moving to you because you don't realize you're moving too. So anyways, I'm not going to update that on Wikipedia because I would lose my privileges to update Wikipedia because people would say I'm dumb. So the Nirvana fallacy. Solutions to problems are rejected because they're not perfect. Yeah, if it's not progress, if it's not success, it's not progress. I'm going to say something controversial because it turned out well. There were some people who were the leaders of a nation who for a time believed the 3/5 compromise was a step in the right direction. And we can look back at that and say, that's not right. And you can look at that and say, no, how does that even work? It doesn't, it's wrong. How do you even have a mind like that? But when you look at it, the historical context, they were actually using a fallacy to do what their reasoning could not. So they used the false compromise fallacy and got more than they had. And then they combined it with this fallacy where you ignore progress for favor of the eventual success. And then very quickly, thankfully, all of that nonsense was stricken from the constitutional record. Good job. But you've got to wonder, would that have happened at all if they didn't take that middle step that was so obviously arbitrary that it focused the conversation dead on this very embarrassing thing so that it had to be talked about. And then they knew, well, this is now as a PR nightmare. Best to just get this thing moving along because now it's my hide versus my hide. Now it's better for me to do this thing to survive as a politician, so I'm going to. So analyze that however you may. That is one possible interpretation of how these fallacies could be constructed to explain movements in conversations. A package deal, treating essentially dissimilar concepts as though they were essentially similar. Yeah, it's just like that time that has nothing to do with right now. I remember that. That's all I can think about. That's exactly what that is. It's baggage. Next one. And by the way, I'm gonna have to do a two-parter on this one. This is way too much fun. Unless this is boring for other people. This is my language here, so of course I'm having a good time. And let me read the room.
I was about to give you a time check here coming out around 4:15.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's as interesting as I thought it'd be. I was thinking not too long ago that it's very similar to a YouTube video that I would watch.
Okay, so I was just imagining the potential consequences of doing a two-parter because I hadn't simulated that. And so the one question that I wanted to check was, if I said that, would somebody else be going, oh, another one of these? I don't know, but that's fine. Thank you. Check passed. Passage deal. Yep, we did that one. Proof by assertion. A proposition is repeatedly restated regardless of contradiction, sometimes confused with argument of repetition. That's, if I say it once, it's, oh, this is the perfect one. Proof by assertion. Can I go to Mount Splashmore? Can I go to Mount Splashmore? Can we 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 go to Mount Splashmore? Okay, and then you get to go to Mount Splashmore. That's proof by assertion. Now that's popular on the news. That's what the 24-hour news cycle is. At least when this video was made. Maybe the news will change in the future, and it won't be run by people who are trying to make people think what, well, whatever the reason is for all of that. We'll leave that up to the imaginations. I'm not going to throw any stones because I'm liable to hit somebody. Prosecutor's fallacy. A low probability of false matches does not mean a low probability of some false match being found. Yeah, that was the COVID statistics right there. Oh, pre-existing conditions. Whoa, false matches. Ooh. And then people saying it's not false matches, and then the people who have experienced subjective false matches, which is a different fallacy of ignoring a subjective position that's stable, then you turn it into a false either or. You see how these fallacies layer on top of each other, when the point is that sometimes what people are talking about is true, and people need to stop arguing if it's true or not and agree on how much of it is true. That would be a far more productive use of time. The prosecutor's fallacy, though, people, well, everyone likes to be the prosecutor when they think they have the advantage. Proving too much. An argument that results in an overly generalized conclusion. Well, Jordan Peterson has a good one for this. Well, I failed the exam. I guess that means I'm a failure. I guess that means I'm not good at school. I guess I better drop out of college. I guess I better move back at home. I guess I better start drinking too much. Guess I better kill myself. I failed the exam. Guess I better kill myself. That's the proving too much fallacy. That's the, whoa, you're getting way too far out there, man. That is not a healthy thought process. You gotta.
WebMD would be a good example for that.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you gotta realize there's a lot going on at each of those stages where there's so much potential for de-escalation that you're nowhere near having it be as bad as it could be from where you might think it is originally. The what you call it, the cheapo phrase for that would be the reaction to your own reaction. Being aware of your reaction to your own reaction, or how strong it is. The psychologist's fallacy. An observer presupposes the objectivity of their own perspective when analyzing a behavioral environment. So you just assume that you've got it objective. You don't do the math. You don't write it down. You know, go through the steps to make sure that you're removed. There's a process for it. No, it's my idea. I'm right. I know how it is. I can analyze this behavioral event. I'm good. There's no question to your method. Then it's the psychologist's fallacy. Your method needs to endure question if it is valid. Your method is questionable if it is valid, or it's nonsense and ego driven if it's not, and it's fine. You're allowed to have ego-driven ideas that you can't put on paper, but you have to understand they're ego-driven ideas you can't put on paper. You don't need to write down on paper why you need to love your kids. You don't need a math lesson for that. You just do it.
Most of the time.
As much as you can. You know it's a good idea. at the very least. So that is that's the psychologist fallacy. The referential fallacy, assuming that all words refer to existing things and that the meanings of the words reside within the things they refer to, as opposed to the words possibly referring to no real object, or that the meaning comes from how they're used. That's the Webster's Dictionary perspective person. You used this word, and so what you really said was this, because I know that you used that word incorrectly, because I know you meant this word based on context, but because you used this specific word, I've got you on a technicality, and you're really saying this. And I'm going to act like you were really saying that, even though I'm smart enough to figure out that wasn't what you were trying to say at all. Because all of that's going on, that person never has to address the fact that, well, they're picking the specific words of these meanings, and they're the arbiter of that, and blah, 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 a bunch of other fallacies. So it's don't look behind the curtain. I'm the great and powerful Oz. That's the referential fallacy there.
I feel like you get into that a lot with empaths. A good meme for that was it said empathy, and it had a picture of the mind and a laser beam going out of it, and it said I can know how you feel just by deciding it in my mind.
Yeah, deciding it's true. Yeah, I love that one. That one had me cracking up. The reification, treating an abstract belief or hypothetical construct as if it were concrete, real event or physical entity. Meaning that you can't understand an idea by metaphor. If you don't think it really happened, you're blind to its potential value for intellect. That's the reification thing in a nutshell. I'm paraphrasing it to better language in my idea, or in my opinion. I think that's a better way of explaining it with less uncertainty or misconception. Retrospective determinism, believing that because an event has occurred under some circumstance, the circumstance must have made the event inevitable. Somebody won the lottery while wearing their lucky shoes. Wearing these socks made winning the lottery, wearing their shoes made winning the lottery inevitable. Oh, they wouldn't have won the lottery if they didn't wear the shoes. If they weren't born with such lucky parents. If they weren't blank, fill in the blank. That's the retrospective determinism. That's saying never had a chance. Which, by the way, is a stable perspective inside other people who feel trapped. So if somebody is feeling trapped, learn the language of retrospective determinism and help them identify small and harmless landmarks for potential things they can control.
I lost your audio there. Was that just me?
To try controlling for the first time when they never thought it was possible before. So by using retrospective determinism and understanding the limitations of that perspective, you can operate outside it and provide literal surprises of possibility, because you know they won't have been considered before. And you teach them how to overcome a lack of free will. That is the potential of understanding and recognizing someone who is using retrospective determinism reliably. That's the key. You can't just see it once and know. That's not science. Science is 3. You see it. Okay, now you say, maybe this is there because I saw this. Let me test it. So now you interact with it in a specific way. Retrospective determinism. Oh, I would just message that guy one of his posts and say, some people are just born lucky, aren't they? And how they respond to that would tell me, do I have a trend? And if they then say, yes, some people are born with all the luck, it's very likely that without the need of a third question, that person will give me 1, 2, or several points now about why they believe what they do about what happens around us at their birth. And they have given me enough stable and reliable points to understand a limitation that they don't understand they're sharing well enough to help give them connection to small ideas, which are small enough that I can see would ride the line between uncertain and scary and uncertain, but filled with promise. That is the potential of retrospective determinism. Slippery slope. asserting that a proposed relatively small first action will inevitably lead to a chain of events. That's saying that if a butterfly flaps its wings, we're going to get a tsunami in Hawaii or wherever tsunamis happen. My geography is really bad. You get a tsunami wherever tsunamis happens because of the butterfly. That's the slippery slope. We can't let that happen. This is the most important election of our lives. We're never going to have another opportunity to defend our values like this again. That's the slippery slope argument mixed in with the other one. The special pleading, and I got 7 minutes left here. The arguer attempts to cite something as an exemption to a generally accepted rule without justifying the exception. For example, well, I know I'm not supposed to ride my motorcycle through the shopping mall, but come on. That's the example of the special pleading. Hey, come on, I'm the cool guy. I'm the Fonz. I get to ride from a motorcycle where other people don't. Hey, but there's no explanation. It's just the special pleading. I'm special. Give me. That's the, no, but it's mine. That's the little kid in us, right? Special pleading. Especially if we are the exception to that rule. Oh, and I am very good at special pleading. Well, but that's only because people around me reliably tell me I'm special. So I will ask for special pleading to the degree that which people will agree I am special. And I'll take it because I don't have a lot else going for me besides that sometimes. So it's mine, give me, I guess. Begging the question, that's using the conclusion of an argument to support itself. That's saying, like, why are all racists over 5 foot tall? That what? That's a begging the question. You're saying, like, you're assuming inside the question so many things that are debatable, and you're reducing it past all of those different points of debate of relevance and context to a yes or no proposition, which could mean anything depending on what dimensions that those things are laid out. But because no, you aren't allowed to question the question provides the answer, which is a question that begs itself. It's a special plead. So begging the question is the special pleading of questions. Begging the question is the question that is so special, it doesn't need to explain why it is not proving it itself. It's a special case. Begging the question. Circular reasoning. The reasoner begins with what he says is trying to end up with. Like, all bachelors are unmarried males. Yeah, what did you just say there? Well, you just repeated a thing, right? I want to do that again. Circular reasoning. The reasoner begins with what he or she is trying to end up with. The statement they give. All bachelors are unmarried males. This is a commonly useful thing if you know how to use it. Okay, circular reasoning is a discipline of mental aikido. It is a different style of redirection than taking an idea, spinning it, and giving it back. Circular reasoning is the equivalent of a dodge maneuver. You let the idea circle back on itself. So if you are having a conversation with someone who is trapped in an aggressive presentation of either or, you're with me or against me, you're a filthy blank or an upstanding blank, and you fill in the group or the role or whatever that's supposed to be the good guys and the bad guys. And we covered that in the shadow in the last lecture, where the concept of good guys and bad guys is really not understanding the good guy and the bad guy is both of us. And we're disgusted with the part of us that is the bad guy, and we're in love with the part of us that is the good guy. And we really can't see that everything that we are is the sum total of everything that the bad guy and the good guy knows, which is a different way of saying that's us. But because that's such a scary concept all at one go, we have to break it down into those small little boxes, which is a logically valid thing to do, because to not be able to do that is one of the different fallacies that we didn't cover. So the valid application, the useful application of circular reasoning. Somebody is trapped on a hamster wheel. That's the situation. Now, the goal. What is the goal of this technique? The goal is to not validate their insanity, because you will remove your own credibility to them, because they are not coming to you for agreement. On some level, they are coming to you with the hope that you will be able to help them sort out this bullshit. And they don't know to what extent they are part of that bullshit. But that is part of their overall goal on some level, which means if there is a subtle enough path to that motivation, that is the one that runs the deepest. But it is also the most subtle and silent one for people to listen to, and they can't hear it unless all of the other reactions, normal reactions to that situation, are handled as well. The way you do that is exposure therapy. Exposure therapy requires two things to be effective. One is repetition, and two is voluntary confrontation with that you do not understand, which bothers you. So circular reasoning in response to self-destructive, unbalanced logic is cognitive behavioral therapy with the person's own consent to explain the limitations of their ideas at their own pace, with a few clever interjections and questions which shift the perspectives you think they might benefit from exploring. Now it is their idea to go boldly where previously they could not before, and all you need to remember is circular reasoning is the response when they're angry. You let them run themselves out. Pick a circular reasoning argument. And I'm going to use I'm going to flip the coin. If it lands on the cross, I'm going to use a positive example. And if it lands on the shield, I'm going to use a negative one. We get to cross this time. Okay, so circular reasoning. Oh man, I am so tired from baking all those Christmas cookies. I couldn't, for the life of me, just imagine what would happen if I didn't bake all of those Christmas cookies. It would have been the end of the world. And I would say, oh, them children really love cookies at Christmas time, don't they? That's practically a circular reasoning right there. Children love cookies. That's what I said. I took the word cookie because they used the word cookie. And that's the key to making it work. You have to pick one of their words, and with practice, one of their ideas or one of their core concepts, and turning that into a circular reasoning response. It doesn't need to be big. It can be any word. If they said the word cookie, you can use the word cookie. If they use the word air guitar, you could use the word earbuds. But there needs to be a word, because what it does is they've got their mental train of thought. It's dragging along in one direction, chugga, 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 think train. And they've got these words in this order. And all of a sudden, you make a link to one of those words that you know spins in a circle. If this was a nautical analogy, you would be harpooning an anchor to them. So their own idea connects them to this circular nonsense that goes nowhere but takes mental resources to comprehend. And so they go, chugga, chugga, think train, whoa. And you can slowly start to get them to chill the fuck out with subsequent iterations. And it's subtle. Just, it has to be a statement that is true and only says what it says. It is a statement with clear and unavoidable boundaries. Joke busted. This is the way. Circular reasoning. It is this way because it is this way. It is what it is. Well, that's a pretty good one. It works. It is what it is. Yep, it is what it is. I don't care what you tell me. I could say that to you. Oh, looks like sun's on fire. We got about 8 minutes to live. Probably less than that if you think about the atmosphere burning up. Yeah, it is what it is. What are you gonna do? So on that note, I'm gonna end the lecture. We made it through most of the fallacies. I really want to do another one. So the next one I do is going to be the rest of the fallacies and the biases. If you think I could do things with the fallacies, wait till you see my bias play. Sounds dirty, but it's not. Because really the power of this doesn't come from making sure you never do any of them. It's knowing when you should do every one of them and when you should not. That is the power of these. It is a function of creativity. It is not a function of math at that point. It is how much complexity can you imagine before it breaks. That is what this is an exercise. This is a neural net of how people don't understand. If Google could understand this the way that I do, Google would be able to predict exactly what we were going to do. And I'll tell you what, it can. So having said all of that, questions?
I definitely look forward to going over this with Duncan and Nancy and stuff. I think we need more varied examples than politicians. But I think, well, what I'm thinking is we can take each of my 5 causes and rotate them. You have race, gender, religion, politics. It's in the cover photo of my group. Let me go check.
I mean, I do try to, as a skilled jester, I do try to hit all of them as hard as possible so that nobody feels left out. Because the ultimate insult from a comedian would be to not be worthy of a joke at all.
Oh, science is real is the other one. I think that might be more climate change than anything else.
Yeah,
but yeah, maybe the politics stuck with me more because it's something I usually control conversations about easily. Because I'm anti-government.
Yeah.
Which means I can hate everybody, but I also know government is necessary. So I can also form any other position I feel like too.
You can read the context of it is the different way of saying that. You've come up with a very eloquent rationalization of why it's not either or, and very good because it's wise.
All right, I gotta go check on the kids. I'll see you Thursday.
All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. Catch you next time. Oh, wait. Damn it. I wanted to ask what he thought of the freestyle rap at the beginning. All right, I'll see you next time.
I'll take it, so I'm 20 minutes.